Hello, thanks for joining in, and welcome to any replay viewers. So my headline tonight might not be super catchy, but to any regular viewers, know that as per usual, I'm talking about Donald Trump, and I'm talking specifically at the moment about the failure of the White House response to the global pandemic, centering around the novel coronavirus, or COVID-19, as it is more popularly known at the moment. So up on my screen at the moment, I have a tweet pertaining to a CNN story about how Trump officials told medical professionals on Monday that there isn't enough personal protective equipment in the strategic national stockpile to fulfill anticipated supply gaps. So officials said on the call that the government didn't yet have a solution. So here we see the downsides to underpreparedness that we know in 2018, the Trump administration disbanded the pandemic response units that operated around the globe, I think 60% of them. They went from having 49 units down to 10. So let's see. 80%, disbanded 80% of the pandemic response units, as well as getting rid of the position of global health czar and a lot of the people involved in that team that were working as part of the National Security Council. And John Bolton had a hand in that dissolution of that important pandemic response team. So there's a CNN story for anyone who wants to follow that up themselves. Health officials not having enough stockpiled medical equipment. Now, something that most people might not know about having a global pandemic is that the predicted death toll for Americans is likely to exceed that of the combined deaths from World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War. So it's quite serious to consider that even if best case scenario, the death rate of infected people is 1%, and 70% of the American population is affected, that's millions of people dying in that scenario. So if there aren't enough medical beds and there aren't enough ventilators, sorry, when I say medical beds, I should say beds in an intensive care unit. If hospital staff are having to make decisions like a cutoff age of 40 for who gets the typically 2 to 3 weeks on oxygen saturation equipment, on extracorporeal breathing assistance apparatus. If you have to be over 60 or even worse, over 40 to be allowed to get access to that help you might need if your breathing is compromised, if the American healthcare system is overwhelmed by the number of severe cases, then all of those people who gave the benefit of the doubt to a white president because they spent so long stoutly denying the benefit of the doubt to a black president, they have helped launch America into this situation, and indeed the world, because America used to be a world leader after Ebola and after Obama instituted various procedures and practices and funded pandemic response units to help coordinate a global response in the advent of a novel disease, such as a version of pneumonia that the entire world population had no immunity to, that the entire population of the world were naive to or virgin to. That's the situation we're in now because we give too much credence to white people. Too much overlooking the harm done by white people, the bankruptcies of white people, because too many people were experiencing an emotional backlash, an irrational emotional backlash to having a black president. So really, racism has condemned a lot of people to die in America, and that's a pattern that's been written small in a lot of American states, with people voting for Republican leaders whose speeches and whose words emotionally fulfill the promise of a social hierarchy in which white people are allowed to continue to believe that they are superior to people of color. That implicit promise has tricked too many Americans whose racism has made them vulnerable to voting against their own interests. So they fall for the sweet words of people who are tacit racists, who imply that cutting Social Security will, wink, wink, only affect certain people, certain lazy, shiftless people. The implication that feeds into people's racism, where they think that welfare and benefits only goes to people of color, has led to premature death and to poverty for a lot of white people in a lot of red states. And those people in red states have still turned their resentment against the elites, against people in blue states, against higher education facilities in blue states, against the culture generators of Hollywood, because they feel that they are judged to be less worthy than people of color, that by embracing diversity, they have been rejected and their worldview has been disparaged as of less value. And they're right. Their racist worldview has been disparaged as being of less value. So I haven't seen the comments so far. Let's have a look. Jason said hello, and I got some applause. Someone asked an irrelevant question about dolphins, so we should block them. Someone wants to exchange Trudeau for Trump. That's why they're asking a question about dolphins. They're a Trump troll. Goodbye to you, sir. Paul says, good morning, Paul, and Redemption number 2 says hello. So yes, welcome, thank you. To return back to my points here, let's have a look at why I sent this to myself. Someone called Stephen Beschloss makes a comment, not to be too alarming, but Trump bankrupted 6 businesses, which tells you he's never had any idea how to escape a downward spiral. That's true and aligns with another comment I saw yesterday, saying that Trump's always been just performatively dancing ahead of his creditors, dancing his way ahead of law enforcement, attacking the law and challenging lawsuits to say I didn't do anything wrong, and just staying one step ahead out of a jail cell and out of penury and bankruptcy for his business incompetence and his lack of ethics and interest in following the law. So Trump has not made a profit, because to make a profit, you have to generate value. But Trump has garnered money into his own pockets by not only evading the law, but by actively collaborating with money launderers. That is to say, facilitating the work and the profit of the type of people whose business involves selling women and children into sexual slavery and into selling illegal drugs to people. So when you say Trump has a history of involvement with money launderers and his businesses have a history of involvement with money launderers, and you can have a look because there's some substantiated accusations of that, then you know he's a man without compunction for others, that he focuses on his personal profit. He focuses on trying to validate his identity as a wealthy man, and that there's no cost to others that he's not prepared to overlook. He's always, for years at least, he's been quite happy to throw people under the bus without conscience, without regret, without concern for others. We are now experiencing life under that bus. And some of us are going to suffer more than others. So wherever we can, we still need to be working together, appealing to local leadership to take appropriate measures in response to the virus, to work on hardship packages, because we also can't rely on Mitch McConnell to pass legislation that Nancy Pelosi has organized and that has been passed by the House. Mitch McConnell could very well presume that continuing hardship will lead to a continuing war footing and war perspective on the part of the American people. And wars often lead to an increase in support for the incumbent president. So you go to war and people say, okay, don't challenge a horse midstream. And the war is the stream and you don't rock the boat or get off the horse, etc. But in this case, I I saw a historian cite a quote from Winston Churchill, who said, the worst political act you can take is to offer false hope that is soon snatched away. And Trump has very certainly done that very publicly and effusively over and over again, falsely reassured the American public, or at least the American public that paid attention to him, that the COVID virus was a hoax, that the alarm around it was a hoax, that there was no need to prepare or be concerned, that it was 15 cases likely to be zero soon, and that he had done everything he needed to do to address the crisis by restricting travel from China, and that he had done everything that he could potentially do by restricting travel from Europe, which abruptly brought back all Americans traveling in Europe and created multiple super spreader events at multiple airports where people were herded in for poorly organized screening efforts and kept together in the thousands for between 4 to 6 hours, or was it 6 to 8 hours? A long time, enough for one person coughing to have droplets distributed to a number of other people, and to send a lot of people home with the illness that might not have had it before. 80% of the carriers of the virus are likely to be asymptomatic or mild cases. So even rigorous testing protocols, if Trump took his foot off the brake for that process, will still not save America from the likely trajectory of complete hospital overwhelm in many places. In rural areas where they have few hospital beds, where they rely on the ability to send people to more urban hospitals if they have something really serious. And now they won't be able to do that because urban hospitals will also be full. Big cities, bigger hospitals will be full past capacity, and they won't be accepting rural patients. So if you're in rural America and you believe Trump that the COVID virus was a hoax, the mental gymnastics involved in suddenly trusting Trump that it's now serious and trusting Trump that he's done enough, when people in the media will be talking about how ventilator production could have been stepped up with orders from the federal government, but that Trump didn't do it. He chose not to do that. Rural people watching their loved ones suffer because of a lack of respirators in their small rural hospitals will have to perform some interesting mental gymnastics to continue to believe in Trump. And many of them will do those mental gymnastics. Many of them will do those performative jumps through whatever hoop they need to do, because such is a psychological need that many people have, to not admit wrongdoing, to not admit mistakes, to not admit a miscalculation in voting for Trump or believing in Trump or continuing to support Trump, or into buying Trump's specific argument that the coronavirus was a hoax, in a specific mistake in listening to their senators, like who was it a governor? It was a governor of a red state who said, look at me, I'm out at a restaurant with my family and it's packed. Governors who played down the risk, who did not model social distancing, who helped spread the disease and who helped inspire their community members to spread the disease. The disease that 80% of people won't experience in a deadly way, but that 20 to 30% of people may require hospitalization, and up to 8% of people over 70 may succumb, may die. And that's a lot of 70-year-olds suffering from an early death. So it's a toll greater than World War I and II in Vietnam, but it's not always your young soldiers who will be using decades of their life. But there's still people with many established reasons to not want to leave this world precipitously, to not want to leave before their time. They have established families and grandchildren. They don't slip away from this world easily, regardless of young people's occasional bad habit of saying, oh, they've had a good life. I thought my 91-year-old grandfather had a good life, but he was very reluctant to leave the earth as well. And as I look back on it, I only wish I'd expressed more sympathy for his reluctance to go, and said, I understand that you're looking forward to so many more things. He was looking forward to my engagement. He was looking forward to my children, and a few more years, and he would have been able to hold a baby, hold a descendant. And that is something that is cruel to take away from people. And that poor leadership, it is no small thing to elect a leader and to vote for someone. It is no small thing when the election of an incompetent, criminal, self-preservational failure of a leader such as Trump will cost people their lives and cost people happy years and happy opportunities to hold loved ones, to be there to see milestones, that long cherished, long awaited milestones, to know that the fruits of their labor have flourished, to know that their labor has borne fruit. That would be a better expression. To see, my grandfather didn't get to see me graduate from university, see me get married and have children, etc. So Bob's saying that he's on self-imposed lockdown. Leukemia Skywalker is saying even more dire is the 22% mortality rate for the 80% demographic. Yes, so I'm talking about how my 91-year-old grandfather, who used to walk for an hour every morning to maintain good health, who ate vegetable soup every day, though the energy and effort he expended into staying well made him feel like he deserved to live for longer. And he didn't die because of COVID-19. He died of pneumonia, but he was still reluctant and unwilling to go. And we should think about that. We should think carefully about that and about the decades of life belonging to healthcare workers, some of whom are likely to perish when they're confronted with the lack of sleep and the exposure to danger that comes with hospital overwhelm and system overwhelm. Paul's been locked up for weeks. If any of my fellow moderators could get rid of the troll who is saying rude things about Black people, that would be great. Thank you, Paul. You're very on the ball. Leukemia Skywalker is saying that he or she has incredible concern that our garbage response to COVID-19 shows vulnerability to our enemies. True, although having a Russian asset elected as a president, a likely Russian asset, also shows vulnerability, but this does show further vulnerability, which America can ill afford. So I agree with you. Leukemia Skywalker also says, I don't understand how anyone who knew of Trump, if only from The Apprentice, trusted him. People might not have watched The Apprentice, but Trump was synonymous with business success for people who didn't look closely into it, for people who saw whiteness and gave benefit of the doubt, for people who heard racist rhetoric and had their minds sufficiently warped by post 9/11 risk-benefit calculations. They saw benefit to electing a racist white person who would shut down travel from other countries, who would institute Muslim bans. That was sufficiently appealing to people who didn't give the benefit, who were constitutionally incapable of giving the benefit of the doubt to a Black president, who watched Fox News, and Fox News found a market for that racism and that passive racism, that incredibly dangerous passive racism. And it's probably so incredibly dangerous because I imagine it's one of the factors in the worse health experienced collectively by people who are Black, particularly if that membership of that demographic is compounded by poverty, which is often also associated with being Black, specifically because of government redlining policies that precluded predominantly Black communities from being able to access home loans. Like specific government maps drawn to say people in these districts that we have drawn up don't get loans, can't access government-backed loans, can't avail themselves of an opportunity to build capital, to experience capital accumulation. And what is it called when you buy a property and it appreciates over time? That's it, asset appreciation. So redlining cut off a lot of people in Black dominant communities from experiencing that economic compounding factor of asset appreciation over time and the ability to pass on wealth intergenerationally and give your descendants the opportunity to attend college because you have compounded interest built on your dedication to your job, to earning an income, to saving that income, to investing in assets that would appreciate over time. There's some more comments that I haven't seen yet. Someone is saying that they see the comment boomer remover and they get furious. The silent generation defeated Nazis and put men on the moon. True, it's a very virulent stain of class warfare and communism inculcated amongst Bernie supporters, who may have started out with good intentions and wanting to address climate change, which is a difficult and intractable problem when so many people have found it difficult to understand that a problem even exists, because going forward, it's a significant existence-threatening problem. So there's been a lot of frustration with people over a certain age who are typically more conservative, who statistically speaking are more prone to dismissing the advice of scientists that climate change is a problem. So Paul says, I'm a boomer and they can kiss my ass. Good for you, Paul. That's the spirit. Who knows what it'll take to stop Bernie's mathematically deluded campaign from going forwards. Because it might be mathematically insupportable for Bernie to continue even being present in the primary race, but he has form. And I would imagine that his ego is a Kremlin asset. And you just have to say things to Bernie to convince him that he's the voice of the people and he should continue prosecuting his case. And you can convince him that he provides an invaluable emotional service to Americans to help those affected by poverty understand that they don't need to be ashamed, that there are various inbuilt sociological factors that perpetuate poverty, that if you're less well off and you have to pay to rent products that you can't afford, you have to rent a car rather than buy a car, or rent a fridge rather than buy a fridge, that over the lifespan of that product, you pay more than a wealthy person does who can afford to buy it outright. When you realize that your poverty has been exploited for significant profit, then you have a rational basis to be angry. And Bernie knows how to capitalize on your rational anger and perform the slight magical shifts into turning your anger into irrational anger, adding the magic fairy pixie dust that makes you not just be rationally angry anymore at the injustice of various economic circumstances that make poverty so expensive in the US, that shift risk from corporations to be borne by the middle and lower classes, because wealthy people can be insured against risk, but still benefit from the profit obtained by entering into risky situations. They can make those gambles whilst the public is forced involuntarily to provide a financial cushion of money. So that's the rational anger. And Bernie makes it irrational when he pretends to be an effective politician, when he pretends to have passed legislation that affected change, because he didn't. He's renamed some post offices and he's added an amendment. So I'm living in an equatorial region. I don't have, I very possibly could have the coronavirus, because 80% of the people who have it are asymptomatic or mild cases. And that's how a majority of the propagation of the disease occurs, is from asymptomatic people walking around. Yes, Bernie's progressiveness is the equivalent to the Tea Party irrationality. And the Tea Party deceptively and irrationally claimed to be loyal to the Constitution. A lot of wealthy white Bernie bros claim to care about poverty, but when you say to them that only Biden can mathematically take the nomination at this point, if you believe in polls at all, and you should, because with a margin of error, Biden is still uniting the Democratic Party, which is predominantly moderate and conservative. So when you take Bernie and you unite his supporters around the irrational position that Bernie is capable of bringing Democratic voters out to vote, when in fact he's lost support since 2016, and young people still don't turn out to vote in any great numbers. They max out at 36% voting rate participation for their demographic, whereas older people have slightly increased their voting participation rate for their demographic to 66%. So 66% of old people or older people have been coming out to vote in the primaries, and 36% of young people have, which is because young people don't concern themselves that much with politics. They are pursuing mates and trying to establish themselves in the workplace. They have stuff on their plate. It's a historic function of youth over time to not be as rigorous participators in the voting system as older people. It's just the nature of youth and being young and having not established yourself yet. People vote protectively in an optional voting system, and older people vote if they're Democrats to try and even out the playing field a little, to vote for safety net protection, rational votes. And if you're older and listen to irrational conservative media, you vote protectively so that communists don't take all of your money in tax, which has a function of half-truth to it, but again is magically transformed into irrationality by the sprinkle of magic Republican propaganda pixie dust. You can have Sanders pixie dust irrationality and GOP pixie dust irrationality. Someone says, I think something, can we block them? If they think the COVID virus is a conspiracy to promote a new world order, the conspiracy we have is that fossil fuel executives have lied to the public and funded and bought out people and institutions to get them to lie to the public, to undersell the risk of climate change and crop failure and increasingly frequent and severe natural disasters arising specifically as a consequence of a heating planet. That's the only global conspiracy that I'm aware of, and other people who want to pretend and be racist about the virus that originated in China, they can be muted or blocked. I leave it up to the very capable moderators. So leukemia Skywalker has been involved in disaster planning and pandemic plans for years. We knew this would come. Articles have indeed been published for the last 2 years saying that the US is underprepared for a disaster of this nature and this magnitude. So yes, it certainly isn't the Illuminati or a New World Order or Jews or lizard people or any of the villains you wish to falsify and create. Nick comments that African Americans were robbed of the post-World War II economic boom that most Americans benefited from. Thank you, Nick. You sound like an ally with an eye on the ball, which is good. And Leukemia Skywalker agrees, which is great. I wish you had can you give yourself a nickname that I can use rather than Leukemia Skywalker? I'd love that. But I remember following you recently on Twitter, and you're a good follow. I'm glad you're here participating in this conversation. particularly considering your background in doing disaster planning and pandemic response, which I'm just going to accept as a true assertion from you because I'm not completely relying on you, but I know you speak in a well-informed way, so you've got credibility with me. All right, I'm going to return to my Twitter message box where I send myself articles that are relevant so that I can share them. Now, this is from a satirical piece by Alexandra Petri, Petri. What a relevant surname at this point in time. So she writes, for comic effect, "There is nothing more American than making choices for other people, I think. I have chosen to be on fire, and I hope everyone I come into contact with will be equally fine making the same choice. If not, it is too late. I am sorry that you are now on fire, having stood too near me in the course of this diatribe. I have made my choice. It is more important that we carry on as normal. Sorry, you didn't get to choose." So I'll have to go back at some point and read that whole article because it will make me smile. We can have a look to see what the entire article is. Actually, it's Washington Post. "No, I will not leave the bar simply because I am on fire." Nope, we will not visit that because I don't have a Washington Post subscription at the present. The Democrats have already united around Joe Biden, and that has, we don't expect a primary result to have 100% monolithic agreement, but Joe Biden has very decisively won all of the recent primary elections. He very decisively won Super Tuesday. He very decisively won Michigan, which was a state Bernie Sanders was expected to win and has a high number of college students in that state. And I know that because I follow a theatre organization called Team Star Kid, which did an amazing musical a few years ago based on the Harry Potter books, which I loved. And I was like, wow, American university students are amazingly creative and musical and talented. So here is a post. So apparently the Trump administration said to governors on a conference call that they should get supplies on their own. They're not handing out any top stockpiled tests, reagents, which are needed to compile the tests, no swabs, and no continuity of message. So Trump's plague does seem like a fairly evocative hashtag. I know sometimes people don't like being negative, but Democrats should probably overcome that resistance because it's very potent in terms of political messaging. All right. So yes, we're not going to get depressed by this. February 24th, Trump said the coronavirus is very much under control and stocks were starting to look very good. So 23 days later, public life in America has essentially been cancelled. The S&P Exchange 500 has fallen 30%, and his approval rating is up 1 point. So there we go, 43%, up from 42 and 41. But look, it's stayed within that range between 39% and 44% for a long time. He's been very consistent. And I would imagine that allies fairly strongly with the Fox News viewership because people who watch that aren't engaging with reality. And somebody pointed out, which I'd like to share with you, that COVID hasn't hit rural America yet. And that's true. So the brain gymnastics that I talked about before in trying to reconcile Trump's false hope with the reality that they'll find themselves in, that mental gymnastics, while achievable for some, will prove difficult to others. And those others who can't bring themselves to still say that Trump's good, even when they can feel the distance between Trump promising that the virus was over and then saying, it's terrible, who knew? Who knew? That gap between the false hope and their reality that they find themselves in within the next 2 weeks will likely prove significant. In any case, Trump's victory was only made possible by the Russian government having their hands on a very precise and revealing set of data given to them by Paul Manafort, showing them the areas they needed to target for propaganda. The disaffected, narcissistic triad scoring young men whose data stolen from Facebook revealed them to be susceptible to targeted psychographic campaigning, micro-targeted psychographic secret ads on Facebook given to young men, particularly white men. They tried with the Black community to suppress voter turnout by brainwashing, bombarding Black voters with negative imagery of Hillary Clinton and misinterpretations of that super predator campaign she ran, which was to try and reduce people who were selling drugs, I would imagine. I'm not familiar with American politics much prior to Donald Trump's ascension into the political arena, but I have heard people say that they are fervent supporters of Hillary Clinton and they believe she was misinterpreted about the super predator comments. And sadly, the Department of Justice yesterday said it was dropping or attempting to drop, had applied to drop the prosecution against the 12 indicted Russians who had been part of a campaign to attack the integrity of the US electoral system. And I refuse to use the word meddling, or what are the other words that underplay it? This is a war of words and a war of information. So calling attacks meddling is to participate in the attempt to brainwash the American public to relax in the presence of ongoing and escalating Russian attacks. So someone makes the point that something might exist in United States law called depraved heart murder, or also known as depraved indifference murder. So I'm not a lawyer. If anybody is familiar with such a law, if there is anything that exists of that nature, or if this lady is making it up, I would be grateful if you brought your understanding to the table. So yes, she's claiming that there's a law where an individual acts with a depraved indifference to human life and where such acts results in a death, despite that individual not explicitly intending to kill. I guess it sounds like she's describing manslaughter, but I don't know that you can find a president guilty of manslaughter because of poor devising and execution of policy. All right. What did the Lancet say? Let's have a look. The Lancet is a medical journal. So the editor of the Lancet said, the UK government said they took a study from the Imperial. It took a study from the Imperial to understand the likely burden of COVID-19 on their national health system. But the Lancet published a paper on January the 24th, in which their modeling suggested 32% admitted to intensive care units with 15% mortality. We have wasted seven weeks. This crisis was entirely preventable. So Boris Johnson announces new measures, including 14-day isolation for households with symptoms. Previously, they were washing their hands of testing their population, and they said they were going to try and rely on something called herd immunity, which is typically a phrase that is associated with immunization. When you immunize, I think 93% of a population, then you have enough immunity that the disease can't take hold in a community because there aren't enough vulnerable, unimmunized people for it to bounce off and create, like imagining a whole bunch of balls let loose in a pinball machine. If there's only a few balls rattling around in there, they're less likely to bump into each other. Yes, herd immunity is like having a whole bunch of cotton balls of immunized people in a pinball machine instead of a lot of little mobile plastic balls bumping into each other. How's that for an analogy? All right. So this guy thinks it won't necessarily be terrible. That might be a different point of view. He's saying that we've made progress with democracy, extreme poverty, basic education, and vaccination. The blue graph on the right, we're looking at from the years 1800 to 2015. Yes, that there's been significant increase in vaccination numbers, significant increase in the proportion of humanity with a basic education, and child mortality has fallen and literacy rates have risen. Yeah, good. Good. These are things that anti-capitalists often forget, that capitalism is often associated with multitudinal benefits to societies. Nevertheless, under-regulated capitalism is associated with a lot of hardship. All right. So let's look. Yep, there's the coronavirus, 8% fatality for the 70 to 79 age group. And the reason why I've paid attention to that is personal, because my father's in that age range. My mother died at the age of 65. But yes, 80 plus years have a 14.8% fatality rate, which obviously is no good. And if I had any great-grandparents left alive, I would be beside myself right now. Oh, somebody made their own bread. So I've got to learn how to do that, because I'm going to be spending a lot of time at home. I'm homeschooling my children, which is exciting and fits with my training. I'm thinking of making some videos for people who are trying to teach their children how to read at home. Oh, somebody's got news. Do you think Bernie supporters will understand that they need to back Biden wholeheartedly? No, I don't think they will. There's a proportion of Bernie Sanders supporters who aren't ride or die, but a lot of them are ride or die. They've been cultivated by the Kremlin and fed misinformation from Bernie himself that they're fighting an establishment. It doesn't even have to be misinformation. It's just it's just a tactic to ignite, to get emotional buy-in from people who will subsequently be irrational, because they'll believe that they are fighters and warriors who've been uniquely called to a cause, like a cult. And as this chap writes, Bernie is a narcissist, and we're going to have to get rid of Trump despite him, because Bernie is threatening to stay despite all his losses, including if he loses badly today. Okay, because Bernie is not so much running for the nomination of the Democratic Party, he's just running to damage the Democratic Party, which he appears to see as his principal enemy. Trump is more a subsidiary enemy for him, or a tangential enemy, but his true enemy is the Democratic Party. And it's a good time for Democrats to realize that. If they consider themselves to be Democratic and support Sanders, it's time to acknowledge he is an unviable candidate. He doesn't unite the majority of Democratic voters, and he doesn't have the support of Black voters, who are the backbone of the Democratic Party. Holly said, his father's a baker, making bread is so easy. Feel free to message me with any tips, because I'm going to try that tomorrow, I think. Actually, do I have the right flour for baking bread? No, I don't. If I can get some, then yes. All right. How do we neutralize Bernie Sanders supporters? Well, we just have to remember not to waste too much mental energy on Bernie Sanders, because he is, because Twitter is not the same as the Democratic base. Most people aren't on Twitter. Twitter is for thought leaders to share solutions and information with. But Bernie Sanders supporters use it to pretend that Bernie has a lot more support than he actually has. His support is fairly minimal, and his voters are very fervent, and it would be very difficult to change the mind of even one of the most fervent ones, but know that there's others who will peel off and vote for someone who evidently has the backing, the decisive backing of a majority of Democratic voters who have turned up to the primary polls. Any wheat flour will work, and you buy dry yeast. Good stuff. Your wife is making reading videos for your grandchildren each day. If you like, I can send you one. Yes, thank you. That would be great. Although I'm planning to make my own as well, because I want to help other people amuse their children as well. And I've got, my children can possibly be in the videos too. They're really keen. They notice that I make videos and they keep picking up devices, even turned off devices, and talking to them and saying hello and goodbye, saying their names. I have to train them not to do that. Saying their full names and saying, I just wanted to say hello and pass on this message to you. And they are just already making their own imaginary videos. All right, let's take that comment off. We don't need it. I'm going to go back to this. Yes, you don't need to use a bread machine. Oh, I'm going to bring up this Newt Gingrich quote, but only briefly because it makes me angry. A reporter asked me today why Conservatives were initially so skeptical of the threat of the coronavirus. I tried to explain that one of the dangerous consequences of, blah, 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 blah. Well, you haven't answered the question, have you, Newt? So if you were asked why Conservatives were initially so skeptical, you needed to speak to the president's denial of the coronavirus as being a problem. But you chose not to because you're part of false conservative framing of the event of this pandemic. So yes, he's playing the victim card. He's the victim of the media being critical of President Trump, who's a terrible president, even though we've had a lot of leaks about how the president lied about the test kits availability, lied about US control of the outbreak, lied about the number of cases, dismissed the entire pandemic response team at the National Security Council, Department of Health and Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Health and Human Services, and refused the tests given out from the World Health Organization because there were test kits and the Trump administration chose not to accept the test kits and instead distributed a flawed and unviable CDC test kit that set Americans back for weeks in being able to potentially test and track those affected with the virus and to impose quarantine measures that would have stopped them from spreading the disease throughout the country in all of the states of the United States of America. So Trump's actions massively increased this upward slope of the trajectory of infections. So here is an important study from the Science magazine, sciencemag.org. Did we look at this yesterday? Apparently the conclusion of it is, despite being less infectious than symptomatic cases, undocumented cases contribute more to the overall transmission than symptomatic cases due to their hidden nature. So people who go around unconsciously transmitting the disease are inadvertently contributing the bulk of transmission chains. So we'll just copy and paste the link to that article so we can share it with you. Let's have a quick look at the abstract. Abstracts are always handy. All right. Estimation of the prevalence, that's the degree of the spread and the contagiousness of undocumented novel coronavirus infections, is critical for understanding the overall prevalence and pandemic potential of the disease. While I think of it, I'm just going to say thank you to Alan. I just want to keep being more vigilant about remembering to say thank you to people for things, so I had to say it while I thought of that. To return to the abstract, can you see it? Let me just check that everybody can see what I'm seeing. No, you can't. Okay. So we'll take this off the screen for a moment and we will share the actual Science Mag article, so you can see it on screen as well. Okay, so here we use observations of reported infection within China in conjunction with mobility data, a networked dynamic metapopulation model, and Bayesian interference, or Bayesian inference, that's a statistical measure, to infer critical epidemiological characteristics associated with SARS-CoV-2, including the fraction of undocumented infections and their contagiousness. We estimate 86% of all infections were undocumented. Per person, the transmission rate of undocumented infections was 55% of documented infections. Yet, due to their greater numbers, undocumented infections were the infection source for 79% of documented cases. All right, so 86% of all infections are undocumented. People who don't get a test, they're not symptomatic enough to qualify for a test. Nobody knows. They might have just a sniffle. They might have no symptoms at all. They might have a mild fever, could be anything. But due to their greater numbers, undocumented infections were the infection source for 79% of documented cases. That means it's not the people who don't have sick leave who are spreading this. It is both the people who have to go to work sick because they don't have sick leave, but primarily just people going out. And this adds to the case for demanding a 2-week quarantine period to allow transmissions to fall in number, and makes the case for hardship payments so that people who can't go without 2 weeks of pay, whose industries will collapse because of shutdowns, even brief ones, we have to think about that and work out some ways, because the Trump administration, we can't just wait for them to do something. It is antithetical to Republican ideology, to Republican framing of economics, to understand that stimulatory measures need to be directed at households, that according to Keynesian economics, you need consumers to buy things. And if you have consumers without funds, then you have a significant disruption to demand. And capitalist economies run on demand. So that's what a recession is huge disruptions to demand. And that's what Trump already initiated with his increasing tariffs and increasing cushioning of risk given to corporations through the lowering of corporate taxes and the awarding of massive tax breaks to wealthy people. He cushioned wealth. He put a cushion around wealth for people in America, and that left middle America and working class, middle America and relatively impoverished America more to the mercies of the tax system, to disproportionately having to shoulder the burden of taxes and paying for American infrastructure, to not just crumble into potholes and irrelevancy. So the COVID pandemic is a very strong illustration of the failings of libertarian philosophy and the fact that too many people have voted for Republicans who spouted libertarian philosophy, that governments weren't any use, that governments never do anything properly. You need governments, you need national stockpiles, you need pandemic response units. And now we're all suffering because too many people voted for Republicans who are inherently anti-government in philosophy and deed. All right. I hope people enjoyed that pep talk. Bob is telling us that in 1954, we were under quarantine for scarlet fever with a warning on our front door. So Bob's actually lived through a quarantine, which is interesting. A very famous American had scarlet fever and lost her sight and her hearing. And that was Helen Keller. And she was a personal hero to me as a child. Somebody's claiming I I don't understand that the tax reduction was to get manufacturing back to the USA. Is that what Trump's tariff war was for as well, to promote a resurgence of American manufacturing? Because the American manufacturing industry has been in recession now because of 2 quarters of negative growth, with a spillover effect to associated industries such as transport because of Trump's actions, Trump's specific actions. And he tweeted, trade wars are good and easy to win. So he is to blame for the pre-existing softening in the American economy that occurred prior to the onslaught on the American economy caused as a consequence of the shutdowns. So we can block the person who doesn't, or at least mute the person who doesn't understand economics and who has paid so little attention to domestic politics and international politics that he doesn't know the havoc that Trump's actions and tariff wars unleashed upon the American economy. Long lines at gun stores, observes Alan. I've heard that. And I saw a relevant Twitter thread from a woman who said, too many American men endorse the buying of guns and speak of the buying of guns as if it's a measure to protect their family, and yet refuse to acknowledge the primary work of protecting a family, which is protecting your house from germs. And this was prior to the coronavirus. It was just a woman saying these men will not acknowledge the value of washing clothes so that viruses don't stay on your clothes and bacteria doesn't stay, of preparing food so that people don't die of food poisoning. They don't engage with the everyday mundane tasks that need to be done to protect families. And all they're interested in doing is the glory of hoarding weapons in the advent of a Bruce Willis situation in Die Hard, without even engaging with the fact that having a gun in your household makes it more likely that someone will find and use that gun against themselves or another member of the family. Holly said his brother and sister and himself were also placed in a sanitarium for rheumatic fever. Wow, you've lived through some exciting things, Bob. Quarantine for scarlet fever and rheumatic fever as well. So you have some experience with disease epidemics as well. So the Queen Victoria Foundation paid for a sanitarium for you. That's interesting. So can we get rid of the troll, please? Mute the troll, because they're calling us uninformed when they are blithely unaware of the manufacturing recession. So we don't need somebody spreading the opposite of truth and the opposite of information here. No, you're not a chartered practicing accountant, because if you were, that level of extreme ignorance would be professionally unforgivable. So, okay, there's a slight possibility that you aren't lying out of both sides of your mouth, but it's very unlikely. Sure, and if we indulge the possibility that you're not lying about your professional background, now is the time for you to go and Google manufacturing recession and note that by all standards, America is in one and has been for some time. Manufacturing recession. Yes, please, Richard, kick the troll. Thank you. Kick the lying troll, because it's not that we're intolerant of other opinions. We're intolerant of people who promote a false reality. There's opinions and there's room for variance on opinions, but straight out ignorance of the fact that America has been pronounced as having a manufacturing sector in recession is not allowable on this broadcast, which I have worked to establish as a broadcast where people can come to hear actual information being discussed and not Kremlin propaganda to undermine America and promote a criminal staying in office. So yes, the problem is probably more that fossil fuel executives, such as Putin, who gets a share of fossil fuel profits in Russia by virtue of being the leader of an essential mafia front state, that all of the oligarchs who control industry in Russia give Putin a cut ever since he imprisoned one billionaire in a cage, a literal cage, and communicated to other oligarch billionaires that he, Putin, would require a cut, a substantial cut of any profits that they made in return for not finding themselves caged because Putin is administering the law. So yes, Putin's been estimated as having a $200 billion value. A lot of his connections were revealed by the leaked Panama Papers, which showed that a childhood friend of Putin's, who's a cello teacher, has billions of dollars in offshore accounts. So yes, Vladimir Putin has definitely worked very hard to exploit vulnerabilities in the American system, in the American political system, and in the American psyche, because for too many white people, there's been a passive racism that has led them to overlook the economic successes overseen by President Obama, who made stimulatory payments that were effective, who initiated bailouts of industries that were of value to states such as Michigan. Trump wants a payroll tax cut so that means there is no money for social services. Yes, 3 years ago is not too soon to have kicked that man out of office. I mean, money's been deducted from people's paychecks for a long time to go into Social Security funds, but at the same time, Republicans have been robbing those Social Security collected funds because they don't believe you deserve them. They believe people with less money, people who need social safety nets, people who've been contributing from their paychecks for decades to social safety net payment systems, don't deserve that money, that they deserve it as wealthy people, deserve cushions for the gambles that they take with business and enterprise to potentially generate profit for themselves, and that they should be rewarded by getting to keep nearly all of that money whilst other people pay for the infrastructure that enables those businesses to exist and flourish in the first place. So Putin will never be able to spend what he has stolen, true. But as I use this analogy because I know people who've struggled with eating disorders, and I'm acquainted with anorexics who are just very goal-oriented, and they wanted to be thin, and it lost a rational basis. People were telling them that their health was in jeopardy and they couldn't be reached anymore because their ability to be rational was compromised by what became a single-minded pursuit of that goal of thinness. And I would imagine that's the case for criminals, international criminals such as Vladimir Putin, whose single-minded pursuit of wealth and power means he doesn't make rational calculations like, can I possibly spend all this money? He wants more wealth and more power to protect himself from the anger of people from whom he has stolen. So Bob has paid into social, what does SSI stand for again? Social Security, what's the I stand for? But in any case, yes, we know that Republicans have a habit of awarding that money to their own interests and pursuits. So I'd better say goodnight and chuff off to bed. Thanks for listening, everybody. If you found this broadcast valuable in any way, please feel free to message me or make posts about what it is you enjoyed. Devote a minute of your time, if you will, to analyzing what it is that's of value to you. Because if you tell me what's valuable, that encourages me to do more of it, and it potentially enables me to become more efficient in my delivery of a service of value. Yes, a president's color does not change their capacity to rule, no, but racism causes a backlash against capable, competent presidents who happen to be Black, and awards an assumption of competence and capacity to rule to presidents who are white and have not earned that, who have not earned the benefit of that doubt. And that's a function of not necessarily visible immediately, but in the long term should be visible to all who are motivated to look closely at why there was a backlash to a competent, capable Black president and the election of an incompetent and criminal white president who was given far more benefit of the doubt by the media and by voters than he ever should have been. Thanks, Richard. I'm very glad you enjoyed the show. And welcome your feedback. I welcome everybody's feedback. I'm not wearing much makeup now because I'm about to go to bed, but tomorrow morning for me, this evening for any of you who are still awake when I next broadcast, I'll probably slap on a bit of concealer. There is significant evidence to demonstrate that Trump is a criminal. He's unindicted co-conspirator number one, and there is a mountain of evidence in terms of him settling lawsuits to the value of $25 million, had his charitable organization disbanded, and his children ruled as being forbidden to sit on the directorial boards of any other charities for a set period of time, that illustrate that Trump is very much a criminal, a white-collar criminal who's been under-prosecuted, under-investigated, and undercharged. And that's why he's an unindicted co-conspirator for violating campaign finance law, not in something that deserved a mere fine, but something that put his personal attorney, Michael Cohen, in prison for a number of years. Yes, which makes the election of paramount importance to the American people, because a criminal president has a lot of vested interests in staying out of prison when it is merely the pronouncements of a corrupt attorney general who has propagated the idea that that the Office of Legal Counsel's opinion should be respected in a memo from 1974 that a sitting president shouldn't be prosecuted. So Robert Mueller, William Barr's friend, followed that advisory, followed that memo when that was to the detriment of his country and his fellow citizens. And yes, if Trump's not reelected, he'll go to prison or Russia. That'd be nice if he could go to Russia, but at the same time, it's not as if I feel safe from Vladimir Putin just because Vladimir Putin's in Russia. Yes. Anyway, as I said, I'd better go to bed. Thanks for listening, chaps. Trolls are not welcome here. Alan, if you want to be added to the moderator list, let me know. I think I'd have to follow you on Periscope, and you'd have to follow me back, and then I could add you to the moderator list. We have many trolls who pretend they're not trolls. Thanks, Bob. Good night. Good night, chaps and ladies. Where are my ladies gone? I used to have more lady viewers. Have I alienated them in some way? Possibly by railing against Amber Heard, because I think she's a domestic abuser who perpetrated a hoax, a very significant career-ruining hoax against Johnny Depp. Oh, you do want to be added to the moderator group? Excellent. I will try and get on that while I still remember. Brain like a sieve at the moment because I have devoted myself to being a repository of a lot of information about a country which I'm not a resident of, but may be a resident of at some point in the relatively near future. When I say relatively near, I mean depending on whenever the hospital system settles down. Could be August, could be December, could be 2021. It's hard to move into a country that I feel is being overrun by a fascist ruler. Bob's in touch with his feminine side, if that counts. Thank you, Bob. I know more than many Americans. Thank you, Jeff. I've devoted myself to finding out information. Alan says he brings a free something. Brings a free what, Alan? Thank you, Craig. Nice to see you too. Si vous êtes français alors, qu'est-ce qui se passe? Wow, all the Periscope videos are governors giving updates as to the coronavirus situation. So I guess you guys have got a lot to go and watch now. Oh, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm on Periscope so that I can add Alan to the moderator list. And I will do that. And if anybody wants to know the name of my YouTube channel, which I broadcast to as well, that's the name of my YouTube channel. And if anybody wants to know the name of my Patreon account, that's it. There, if they want to help defray the cost of subscribing to a website that allows me to stream on multiple channels and buy microphones. If I don't look up Alan now, then I will forget to. That's a very Robin Hood name now that I'm looking at it. Oh, you'll bring a few women. Excellent. Yes, I had some more women. My very first Patreon supporter was a woman. Actually, my favorite woman is not here right now. She's from a different side of the world. What am I talking about? How could I say I don't have many women? I don't have a lot of women in the comments section. But now that I've thought of it, some of my strongest supporters actually behind the scenes are women. And I apologize for forgetting about that for a moment when I was thinking about how, yes, I largely talk to chaps, all of whom I like and respect. But yes, there's a paucity of women in the comment section sometimes. Thank you, everybody. Richard will bring women too. Awesome. Thanks, Richard. Women. Take care, everybody. I'll go sleep and have a great day. Take care of yourselves. Watch Periscope videos and make brainstorming lists of ways that we can help our fellow men, women, and children around us, some of whom will be more greatly impacted than we can even imagine if we can't directly relate to what it's like to be without income and without capacity to pay bills or keep up. I imagine the number of domestic violence incidents will rise sharply, as they do when people are under financial hardship and also forced into close proximity. Cheers, everyone. Thanks.